Hey there, Foster Care Nation. We wanted to open up a dialogue and talk with some of the listeners a little bit and just see what you guys have to say. We have a voicemail line. It is at 413-FOSTER-3. That's 413-367-8373. Now, we would love to be able to share some of your stories. If you have a couple quick stories you want to put on the air, or if it's something you'd just like to talk to us a little bit and let us know what you're hearing and what you would like to hear, that would be awesome. We would love to have that from you guys. So if you would reach out and let us know. Also, I'm going to just assume that you guys know that we are talking about putting some of these stories on the air. So if there's some privacy issues, feel free to change a name. Don't use a name. I don't care. Just take care of the privacy stuff. We don't want anybody getting in any trouble on anything like that. We're not trying to out anybody's story out here in the world. So just be mindful of privacy. Again, that is the phone number is 413-FOSTER-3, 413-367-8373. Thanks a lot, and we hope to hear from you soon. You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
I signal.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey. And today we just have Jason again. Amanda's off doing all those kidly duties. We have 10, 12 inches of snow, something like that on the ground, and the kids are all home from school today and yesterday and tomorrow. And there's a bit of wildness happening in our house. So today it's just me and Anastasia Lee. How are you doing today, Anastasia?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. We've overcome our technical difficulties that nobody listening will know about it because we'll have cut all that out. But just know that we've been fighting technology up to this point already. You know, as you know, and everybody else listening knows, we talk about foster care and adoption, which means there's a good chance you probably know something about this, maybe even from a very personal experience. So how did you get connected in this system?
Well, I was adopted from Russia when I was 5 by an American family. So we all live in Houston, Texas now. And that's kind of where my passion obviously started. I was given up by my birth mother at age 3 over there. It was a rough time. This was mid-90s, so kind of right around the fall of the Soviet Union, right before Putin took over. And that's really obviously what brought me here. And I'm very thankful for it, but it was a transition.
I can imagine. I recall that time vaguely. So you're a few years younger than me because I remember that time a little bit better than a 3-year-old would have.
Yeah.
But that was a big time, you know, in the world. That's a lot of like global economic transitions and a lot of stuff going on in the world. And you know, you kind of got sucked into the middle of that. I'm curious because I know very little about Russia, full disclosure. So did that involve like an orphanage or some sort of foster care system or what did that look like?
Yes. So when I was 3, we were my sister and I have a younger sister who I was blessed enough to be adopted with. We were taken from our birth mother and put into an orphanage. So I was in an orphanage from age 3 to 5 over there until I had been adopted. Yes.
Okay. You mentioned you were taken from your mother. Was that something involuntary, like part of their system over there, child welfare system?
It was, yes. She, you know, like I said, it was a very rough time. From what I recall, from what I remember of her, we had no other family. We lived in a shelter or a group home kind of thing with 3 rooms, 1 kitchen, and probably about 7 or 8 other people. There were no bed sheets. There were bugs everywhere. And she was 16 years old when she had me. She was 19 when she had my sister. She had no choice. She was a prostitute, to be quite honest with you. And one day, I think somebody else in the house noticed that she was gone for an incredibly long time, made a call, and we were put up for adoption.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's quite the story to begin your life with. So I'm curious, number one, that's a lot of stuff for a young child to be processing, even from the perspective of the kid and how much they can understand. I would assume that hopefully you've had some trauma work done in your life. Have you done a lot of that to figure out how to work through that and get yourself into a healthy mind space?
I had to. I absolutely had to. When I came over here at 5, I was not in the right headspace at all. I was a very troubled child, just to put it up front. I caused my parents a lot of grief and anguish, and I was mean to other kids, mean to my sister. I had no way of expressing my feelings, so I started self-harming very early at age 8. And so they had me put in therapy at age 8. And then I went to a therapeutic boarding school for high school because it just honestly seemed to get progressively worse. And I think that boarding school plus, maturing, aging, going through puberty, and then eventually having my own child is what saved my life.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So self-harm at age 8 is pretty uncommon at that age.
It's terrifying because my son now is 8 years old and I don't think he even knows what that is. So when I look back at that, I didn't want to acknowledge it for a long time too. When I first went into therapy, they were like, well, this is probably because of your adoption. I was like, I barely remember it. What does that have to do with anything? Like, I just am who I am, and that was not the case. That was absolutely not the case. I had to work through a lot of different types of therapy to get to where I am now.
Oh, I can only imagine, because that's a bucket of stuff to deal with. And I'm not convinced that pretty much every human doesn't need some therapy work in their life anyways.
I'm with you on that.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks that, because we've all had our personal traumas in life. And the problem is most people will hear a story like this and say, well, I didn't have anything like that in my life. My life was pretty easy. And the truth is that my worst day is still my worst day, and it's just as bad as your worst day is for you, because we have relative perception here.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's so easy to look at somebody else's story and think, oh, that's a lot better than mine, or that's a lot worse than mine. But really, it's about what we do with it, not, or how we handle it. So I agree with you on that.
All right. So we're going to start a fund where we try and get everybody to go see a therapist, because I know some people that I want to send first.
Me too. I got a couple people I could recommend.
But I'm not letting anybody have the phone number for my therapist, because I need him to have lots of room in his schedule.
I went through probably maybe 20 or 30 therapists before, or psychiatrists, honestly, to find the one that worked for me. So it's not something that it's an easy task to just find one and, it's going to be all gold and diamonds from there. You have to work at it. And so no one gets my therapist number either. So.
Well, the very first therapist I ever visited, I'm not going to say he was bad at the job or anything, but he wasn't the guy for me. His methodology was not working well for me. And I happened to reach out to a friend of mine who had a pretty traumatic past and said, hey, dude, do you have any recommendations? And he recommended a guy, and my gosh, if he's not the perfect guy, because this guy, he's the right guy for me. And when Amanda comes with me, her and I do these visits together typically, and she can actually talk to him as well. It's a good fit for her as well. So as a married couple, only having to go through 2 therapists to find the one we needed, I think we got super lucky.
That is awesome. I wish. I think you also have to be willing to put in a certain amount of work to want to have a therapist to work. And, at 8 years old, I wasn't, I didn't really take it that seriously. I don't even think I knew what was going on, quite honestly. But I found my current doctor, who I'm with now, at around, I want to say age 20-ish. So I've been with her almost 10 years. And she's perfect. But at that point I was willing to do the work, because at that point I had my son and I had no choice, quite honestly. Yeah.
Well, let's be real honest here. You had a choice, but you chose the betterment of your son over something that was hard.
That is a good way to put it. You're right. I did have a choice. And I would choose him every day. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention that, because that's something that so many people don't realize, that we make choices every day. And sometimes we'll say that I don't have a choice. And for better or worse, we always have a choice. Sometimes I choose not to go to jail, right?
Right? Yes. Thankfully, I've never been there.
I was only locked up once when I was about 5 years old because my dad was a police officer and he thought it was funny to lock me up.
Sorry, going. What did you do?
Yeah, my dad was a police officer and a bit of a jokester, so he definitely he had his fun with that, and I got to experience it as a very young child. I think it was also probably somewhere deep down inside he was really wanting me to go, hey, I don't want to do this. Yeah, scared straight before I ever really did anything terribly wrong. So
yeah. Well, I would be scared straight too. My parents told me if I ever went to jail, they were not going to bail me out, and I think that kind of kept me at least in the legal system out of trouble. I was just lucky enough to never have gotten caught, I guess.
Well, my dad always told me if I'm in jail, I should probably bribe the jailer not to let him in the cell with me.
Oh gosh. Okay.
He was very serious about that. He was very old school, but yeah, but that was just kind of his way of making certain I realized how serious some of this stuff was. And it
is serious. And look at you, never in jail. So
right. Exactly. I do want to step back a little bit though, because you'd mentioned self-harm. I know self-harm runs a lot with suicidal ideation and stuff like that. Did you ever struggle with that as part of your journey?
Yes, that was actually probably one of the main reasons I went to boarding school was because I started to attempt suicide at about, I would say age 14. I was 14. And I was obviously never successful at it, thank God. But there were multiple things I tried. There was, cutting, there were pills, alcohol. There was just things I was doing that was just not appropriate for anybody to really be doing. And I don't think I even really understand why I was doing it, besides that there was so much pain inside that I didn't know how to express. And it's not because, to be honest with you, I don't even think I wanted to die. I just wanted something to express what I was feeling. And that's what I happened to choose.
Well, I have to ask because, we've had lots of kids come through our house and we've had our own journeys. And so I'm curious, as you look back on that, what was where were you at? Was the suicidal ideation, self-harm, was that a method of just really trying to be certain that you could control the pain, or was it something else altogether?
I think it was a cry for help. I think I was suppressed quite a few memories. And around that age, I was hitting puberty, and I would even just like randomly sometimes get these flashbacks of things I hadn't remembered for years. And there are things, I was remembering that at the time, being 3, 4 with my mom or in the orphanage, that didn't make sense. That once I started to get older, I understood this is really messed up. And I couldn't talk about it. At the time I felt like I couldn't talk about it. But once I got there, I think that we were able to figure out a way I could communicate. And that was by sending me to a boarding school where I could solely focus on myself and what I needed to do to process what happened.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I'm going to bet, the things that happened when you were, 3 to 5 years old, you probably didn't have a whole lot of ability to process through any of that stuff at that age.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was completely clueless. And then I was also very naive as to how it was affecting my present life at the time. I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know, how these memories or how these, experiences at 3 were affecting my life. And I was 14 and I'm living in, America, and my parents are really well off. And, I could have anything I wanted. I could do anything I wanted. And I felt ungrateful, and I felt sad, and I didn't know why. And I felt guilty, quite honestly. There was just a certain amount of guilt I felt. And instead of processing it in a healthy way, I chose, suicidal attempts and cutting and things like that. I just needed to be more educated on how to process my emotions.
Yeah, because I'm just going to guess you didn't pay attention in school when they had the how to handle hard emotions class, right?
No, yeah. I mean, they definitely did not, as far as I remember, teach that one.
And I will I don't like to sound like I'm just complaining about the education system we have here in America, because quite frankly, we have it pretty good. But there are a couple things that I feel like they really fail with. And one of them is the things like emotional processing for kids, because how many kids do we know who are going through hard things who keep it bottled up? And the other one would be personal finance, because my God, when I stepped out of high school, I knew how to make some money, because you had to go to work, you get money, or do something stupid and illegal. I usually just chose work because it was easier, and I knew how to spend money. That was all the skills I had around that, and that led to its own issues in my early adulthood, dealing with basically being broke all day, every day, because I had no clue how to manage money, and I didn't have any idea how to manage my emotions either. So I can only imagine for someone who went through something as traumatic and big as you had been through, whether you realized it or not at the time, that's a lot more pressure on you as a teenager. And I mean, come on, puberty was hard on all of us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was hard on us though when we didn't have all the extra pressure. So that's a tough time. I mean, I remember 14-year-old girls when I was in school, and let me tell you, they were kind of mean. Hey there, Foster Care Nation. We'd like to take a quick minute to step out of the podcast here and ask you guys for a little bit of support. If you could share an episode with people, friends, in a group, with family, anywhere where there's somebody who would like to hear this. Also, if you'd like to join us and support our mission, a couple dollars a month would be really helpful. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/fostercarenation. Now back to the show.
Yeah, really mean and really crazy. At least for myself, So yeah, I agree with you on what you said earlier about, I think that school systems should definitely teach that kind of stuff, because I was lucky enough to have been adopted again by people who were able to afford, a third party therapist for me. But there are foster kids, living in homes and stuff, who are going to school every day, just coming home, where's their outlet? Where are they going to end up? I don't know where I would be if I didn't have that.
Yeah. And the foster system here in Missouri, at least, does provide some level of help. The difficulty is that right now we're in the middle of this global pandemic, which is also a global trauma, and all the therapists are pretty booked up.
I bet.
So yeah, go become a new patient and a therapist somewhere, and see how long it takes you to get in.
No, for real. I completely could see that. I mean, I actually had a session with my therapist earlier today, and she was like, okay, so my next available booking is in 2 months, but I can squeeze you in for a 20-minute session in 2 weeks, because she's known me forever. And I was like, 2 months? Like, you're busy. Good for you. I don't know. Is that a compliment? Like, I get that. I think that this pandemic has been very hard on quite a few people. And I can only imagine, what kids are thinking right now, because we were talking earlier kind of about 9/11, not that this is the same thing, but it is still something that a lot of kids that I think are afraid of, and they're going to take this on and remember this for the rest of their lives.
Oh, I remember 9/11. And as a young man, I had just gotten out of the military at that point in time. I remember that day very clearly, and I don't remember a lot of my childhood. A lot of it's pushed out in my head. Those days, though, it was a big deal to me, and I was in my early 20s. We'll just give it that, because I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time. But yeah, it was a big deal to me. It's a conversation I've been thinking about sitting down with my older two boys, because they were very young at the time. They're 21 and 23 right now. And so that was like at that formative time for them. And I'm curious to really try and understand how that has affected them growing up. So, in this world with a pandemic, with an entire population of kids who have grown up always having a boogeyman somewhere trying to kill America, and then having all the additional traumas, because people don't realize that when you're standing in line at the Walmart, you're standing in line with somebody who's probably experienced some sort of physical abuse, some sort of sexual trauma, all kinds of horrible stuff, and we don't treat each other like we're people who all have experienced some trauma.
No. And then you throw online, you throw social media onto that, you throw all these different factors in, and it has become an incredibly hard world to find support in, when it's so easy to just, for people to go and make fun of each other because they're nameless, they're faceless, they're not being recognized as people. And so I get that.
Oh, absolutely. Just today I saw, because we have the big snowstorm coming through and the interstates the snow won't quit falling. So the highways are kind of crappish right now. And I was glancing at the MoDOT page, which is where, that's who takes care of our highways. And there's always the one person who wants to yell and scream and act like they, you guys have totally screwed this up and you're horrible and you're bad. And then everybody else,
better,
yeah. And everybody else responds with more or less the same level of hate and vitriol towards that guy. Hey, go get your license and go get hired over there. Nobody wants to work, so go get a job and do this. And everybody's just as much vitriol and hate back. And I'm like, whoa, this doesn't solve anything.
It is a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. And it's hard, like you said, when you have other things going on in your life that people don't know about, because everybody is going through some type of struggle. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. A struggle is a struggle. And so I think that, being nicer to people would definitely be a lovely thing if the world could do that. But I don't know. I hope we get there one day.
You and me both, because from what I've seen, unfortunately, we're not headed in that direction quite yet. Yeah. Maybe soon. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on what pages you follow, but man, I do see a lot of bashing. I see a lot of hate, and I see, I see people not treating people as people. So I hope so. I definitely have hopes for it.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to where we need a lot of trauma-informed humans in our life to help us realize that, hey, we've all been through trauma of some sort. If you have buried your parents, that's a trauma. And I have, my dad passed away several years ago. There are tons of traumas in your life that come back later on and realize that, oh yeah, I act this way because of this thing that happened when I was a kid, and we want to play it off like, well, yeah, but that's when I was a kid and that wasn't that big of a deal.
Well, like everybody goes through it or whatever, but it's still, you're right. It is still a big deal. It's a lot. I couldn't imagine losing, my adoptive parents right now. I mean, I'm almost 30 and I rely on, I talk to them daily, I mean, those are my parents. And I think I would need a lot more therapy if anything ever happened anytime soon.
Yeah. Oh, I feel you. And just mentioning that part makes me a little bit curious. Do you have any connection with your biological family in Russia?
No. I've tried multiple ways to find them. I have literally just my birth mother's name and her birthday. I have signed on to the Russian version of Facebook, looking her up. But with her name and her birthday, apparently it's a relatively common name. So I wasn't able to find her. My parents assume, because the way it works, at least in Russia, when we were put in the orphanage, she had a year to get her stuff together, as she would have to pay alimony to the orphanage, which is what they called it. That's their words, alimony, to the orphanage for I guess as a donation or to keep us on hold. This sounds awful, but just to kind of keep us on reserve so we wouldn't be put up for adoption. But after a year, if you don't do that, which she didn't, you are eligible for adoption. And so she disappeared very quickly after we were put in there. And she would have had the rights to come visit us if she had wanted to. So my parents' theory is something might have happened to her because of her job. I don't know though. I do know that if I ever were to meet her, I would just hug her, tell her I love her, and tell her that it's okay. And I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a lot of tough stuff for you to work through over the years. And I can only imagine what that's been, what that would have been for her to walk through. Did you ever know anything about your biological father?
No, I took an ancestry DNA test here, and I found out that he was from Iran. I found out, it was like 48% Persian and then 52% Russian or something like that. So that's all I know about him. I did find some relatives from his side that I was able to connect to, but they are sixth cousins. And nobody knows his name or who it could have possibly been. Nobody recognizes my mom's name. But I did find one cousin who lives in London, and she has kind of just taken me in, and it was nice to find just some kind of biological, connection with somebody, even if it is a sixth cousin in London. it was nice to have that. So she's been very supportive. And again, I was adopted with my younger sister, so I still have her as well. We're biological through the mother. We do have different fathers, and she has a father listed on her birth certificate, but she was, I think, 18 months old when we came over. So I don't think she has ever had as much. I mean, she doesn't even like to talk about it. She's never had an interest in that part of our lives.
Okay, yeah, and it seems that some people just do not, and some people do. But biology is one of those things that has always just been so interesting to me that it seems for most kids, it doesn't go away, that questioning of who your parents were and what that means. Because, yeah, I'll be real honest, I don't look like my parents. But I have 3 siblings who do look just like me and one who does not look like any of us. My oldest sister, she's very pale and very just different. And the younger 3 all look the same. And even as a teenager, I looked around and went, this doesn't look right. What's this? It was a question that I had in my own head. And so I know that that's something that every child who knows they've been adopted has. Like, there's that big piece. Who am I?
That's a huge part of it.
How does that work for you? Do you have that "who am I" question in your head, or what is the question that the biology really poses for you?
I do. I did in the past before. And I think what I came down to is I just have to make myself, I might have been related to people who I am no longer in contact with, but at the end of the day, I get to choose who I am and who I want to be. And I try to focus more on that, because whenever I was asking the questions of, who am I? That's when I started spiraling. I became, just kind of like my mom. I was drinking a lot. I was partying a lot. And then I think it really just kind of hit me when I had my son. It's not about me anymore. And who I want to be is a good mother. And I want to take care of him correctly. And I want him to always feel loved. And I, eventually would love to foster and adopt. And so I took parts of the people that I have now to make just a new version of myself.
Wow. I think that's so very insightful of you to have gotten to that point, because the truth is we even as people who are biologically connected to the parents they were raised with, I think we all have that question to some extent. Who am I? And we have to make that decision. It seems that even kids who know who their parents are, their biological parents are, and maybe don't live with them, there's always that piece of wanting to have some of that in their experience. But knowing who you are is the person you've chosen to become, that's the next level.
It took me, like I said, it took me years of therapy to kind of get there. Cause I still, don't get me wrong, have doubts every once in a while, like when I even found out I was part Persian, my dad said something that was just so awful that I kind of don't even want to repeat, because I don't want to offend anybody on air, but it was, it was a racial comment. And I remember being ashamed of it for a minute, and he meant it as a joke. He did not mean it in a harmful way. Like, my dad is so supportive of me, always trying to find my biological family. And my dad is actually one of my biggest supporters. But I will never forget, what he said. And for me, kind of trying to hide that for a little bit by just coming, no, I'm full Russian, And then even then, after a while, I even stopped saying I was Russian. I would just tell people I'm from Houston, whenever they'd ask where I'm from. And so it took trial and error, basically, of figuring out what made me feel the most comfortable in situations. Because when people ask questions and you answer them, there's going to be a follow-up question, and you don't always know what it's going to be. I was recently at a conference for my job, and my name is Anastasia, which is obviously Russian, and a doctor was pushing. He said, "So where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Houston, Texas." He goes, "Well, where were you originally from?" I was like, "Oh, I've lived there most of my life." I just tried and kind of evade the question. He goes, "What is your ethnicity?" Straight up, no filter. And I was like, "Well, I was born in Russia, and my dad is Persian." And he stopped asking questions after that. But, people can be a little insensitive to it sometimes. And so I think you have to kind of think through, who you are before you answer them. Otherwise, it can be a very uncomfortable situation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it took me quite a few years to get to the point where I'm willing to just be rude back to people if I feel like they're being unkind, rude, insensitive, whatever. I had a friend of mine. We had a couple kids we were fostering at the time, and we were somewhere, and my friend happened to ran across him, and he leans over and kind of under his breath, he says, "Hey, are they half black?" And I looked at him and I said, "No, they're half white."
That is perfect. That is hilarious. I love that response because, it brings attention to what they said is not appropriate. But at the same time, it plays it off like I forgive your ignorance, because some people just don't understand. And, I haven't gotten, if that had been anybody else, I would have just been like, I'm from Houston, but I was with my boss, and I was with actually two of my bosses. And this doctor was a big client of ours. So I was not able to just be like, I'm not going to answer that, or I don't want to talk to you, or, whatever it was. I just kind of had to go through the motions of it and take it as gracefully as I could. But, there's also been times where I've been a little bit ignorant to some things, or some people's genetic backgrounds or some things. And so I understand people can just maybe also slip up and say something that they don't really necessarily mean. And so I try and take it with a grain of salt, like, they're just ignorant, they're just ignorant.
Yeah. Grace is a big thing, learning how to have grace towards other people. But I will tell you that I leave grace for God sometimes. He can have more grace than I can, for sure, because there are moments where I feel it's necessary to call it out loud in the moment. I had a conversation with a guy a while back where I looked at him and literally said, dude, you can be a racist if you want. That's fine. I'm not saying who you can or can't be. I'm just telling you, like, who I am. And so I'm going to call it out, call what I see out loud. And I'm going to say that the conversation didn't go terribly wonderfully, or yeah. And it's a coworker, and we don't chat a whole lot anymore. And if we need something on a professional level, I'll answer his question. He'll answer mine. But I leave it at that, because some people in this world are just going to have their biases that I think it comes a lot out of their parents' generation. And unless they have done the work to get past that, they're never going to, my dad growing up, my dad was a police officer, and he worked in some rough areas up there in Tennessee. There's a little town called Berry Hill, Tennessee. Sounds like a pretty little town, right? Berry Hill, Tennessee is actually where the projects were back in the 80s. It was like a small section of Nashville. And I'm going to tell you, there was nothing pretty or kind about that part of town. It was the most dangerous part of Nashville at that point in time. And so, like, he developed a lot of biases growing up in the 50s and early 60s. And then as part of his job, he went to work in the inner city as a police officer. He developed a lot of biases and a lot of racism in his life. And as we got older, I lived with that for a long time. But I will give him credit here, and that is that one of my stepsisters married a black man, and Joe Mosey is one hell of a good guy, and he's a great father. And his my stepsister, her family has a nasty genetic disease, and she lost the lottery, and in her family, so she passed a few years ago. And Joe has, I think they had 5 kids together. Joe's still an amazing father. And what Joe did was he showed my dad, like, hey, there's all these stereotypes, and it's not that. And so when we first got into fostering, we talked to a couple members of our family who we knew had some racist tendencies. And we were shocked to be able to see just how far people were able to turn from that and change their life to have a whole different reaction to what was going on in their world.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. My parents at the time, this sounds awful, but yeah, they chose to adopt from Russia because they wanted children who looked like them. And that was because of my grandparents, who were incredibly racist. And actually, my grandfather was a police officer too. So I wonder if, there was something with that, but my mother just felt like she wouldn't be able to ever have him love us if we didn't look like the family.
Yeah. And for some people that matters. And I think if you're going to be a foster family, for sure, you need to take that into account and realize who you're going to have your family around and what that's going to look like. We had that conversation with my dad. We had that conversation with my wife's grandma. She was 21 years old when she saw her first black human being in person.
Wow.
You know, that's how far out in the woods in southern Missouri she lived. I've been to her hometown. Oh my gosh. If you're worried about overpopulation, I know a town you can put a lot of people in. There's nothing there. But that part of the state does have a lot more tendency towards a lot of that stuff. And she grew up in that. And after we'd started fostering, we had one little guy. I'm going to call him Carl. I always call him Carl because that was his name in our house. That was his nickname. It's not his real name. But Carl was the darkest skinned little baby you ever met in your life. And we were a little concerned about how her grandma would respond to him. And this, I don't know how old. She'd never tell you the truth and you couldn't tell it. But this older gal who had a lot of racist tendencies, she flat fell in love with this little boy. To the point where my wife and her went to the grocery store one day and with the baby and this older white dude, he's looking at my wife, and my wife has Irish heritage for the most part. She looks very, very Irish, very pale skin, very red hair. And this guy keeps like staring at my wife and giving her the evil eye and all. He did not like the fact that a white woman was carrying a black baby around. He made it very clear to the point where grandma, who at that point was old enough to pull this off and be okay, she finally just totally lost her stuff on this guy. And she started yelling and screaming and hollering at this dude and just like giving him the story. Like, look here, you know, this is not okay. And he finally just left his cart in the aisle and then left the store.
I bet that was a really awakening experience for him, quite honestly. I really bet it was. I have this vivid memory of being in the grocery store with my mom, and I'm white, but I've got dark eyes, and both my parents have green eyes, and they're blonde. And I have dark hair. And this lady at the grocery store, she said, "My goodness, where do you get those big brown eyes?" And I turned around and I said, "My aunt has big brown eyes." And it's true, because my aunt, who's my mom's biological sister, has brown eyes. And so I was confused at the question. My mom told me years later that she was incredibly offended by it, because I think my mom kind of takes everything as they know, or something. And again, I just try to chalk it up to ignorance. Like, I mean, I can have brown eyes. My sister have green eyes. That's how biology works sometimes. And that's basic science.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I'll be real honest. Science says that little baby Carl did not come from me and my wife.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually had a gal who, it was a little Chinese restaurant, I think. And it was an Asian woman who was running, and she was always just sweet to us. Very nice lady. But she came in one day and we had the baby. She come, "Oh, he's so cute." And she looks at me dead in the eye and she's like, "He looks just like you." And I'm thinking, no, he doesn't. No. But, and I know she was trying to be kind, and she probably had dealt with her fair share of racism being an Asian in America, running a Chinese restaurant. And she was just being kind. But it made me laugh because I'm like, yeah, most people don't see it that way, and they don't try to be kind in those moments. And my God, what a different world we would live in if more people just tried out kindness instead of trying to find a reason to separate us into different camps.
I completely agree with that. My son, he is half Hispanic, and he's dark though. I mean, he looks nothing like me. And I was young when I had him. I had him when I was 20 years old. And I remember carrying him around one day, and we were at the park, and some lady thought I was his nanny. She thought I was his babysitter. And I just had to explain, no, that's my baby. I'm just pale, but he's got my eyes. Look really closely. He's got my face.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing in our society sometimes to deal with that. But I see in my kids' generation that what I'm not seeing is that sort of race-based trouble in a lot of their friend groups. That they're more willing to be friends with people who don't look like them, and I see that as a sign of us moving in the right direction, hopefully.
I completely agree, honestly. I think that, interracial relationships or like biracial babies, that's not even as big of an issue as it was, 40, 50 years ago. That would have been a big deal, at my parents' time. My dad is 75, just to put it in perspective. So he was raised in like Canyon, Texas, which is, he was basically, like you said, 21 years old before he saw his first anybody who was not white. And so I think that, once we kind of realized how messed up this whole thing was, and once we started having those conversations, then it became not so big of a deal. And we need to have those conversations about mental health more, I think, now. And I think that's happening. I think a lot more people are open about mental health, mental struggles. You see celebrities now checking themselves into rehab, and it's not as big of taboo as it would have been maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I I love that. I do think that that's very progressive. And I do think that we're moving forward in those aspects. I mean, I don't think I would have talked about my personal journey with mental health 10 years ago. And here I am on your podcast now.
Well, and you're right. It's so important because, growing up, I remember my mom had some struggles around some things. And my dad said, you don't need to pay somebody to talk to. You can just talk to me. Right. And that was just his mentality. And it wasn't the truth for her, though. She needed a little bit, again, Mom, if you're listening, that's nothing bad about you. I see a guy. All right. So don't take that the wrong way, because it's not at all meant that way. We all go to the doctor for a checkup from time to time. And we need
it's so important.
Yeah. And the head doc, he's really important too. He needs to check a few things once in a while. You need to check the oil in the motor and make sure you're not getting ready to blow a motor up, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think that mental health is a stigma that we're still kind of, working, through getting to be more open about, but it is nowhere near talked about enough. And I think that's why there's so much hate. Like we were talking about earlier, it's because people have these feelings for themselves, or these feelings that they can't process, that they are just projecting. And it makes the world a less bright place. It really does. And I think once you're able to address your own issues, I'll be honest, I was a mean kid. I was mean to other children. I wasn't mean to animals ever. I was mean to children though. And it was because I had so much pain and I wanted everybody to feel it. And so once I was able to kind of process that, work through it, I would like to say that every day I do my best to be I swear, I really I put my thoughts into it every day, every person I talk to be like, is this the nicest thing I can say? And I mean, it can be nice feedback too. It doesn't always have to be you're being fake, but is this something that's going to be helpful, or is this something that's going to be hurtful? And that starts with you. It really does.
Yeah. I'm working on theory over here. And, again, full disclosure, my PhD hanging on the wall over here was drawn by me with crayons. So
I love it.
Maybe somebody with a real PhD can hash this idea out a little bit. But I really feel oftentimes like in a world where we have so much difficulty, so much trauma, so much going on, and people feel so out of control, that part of the reason we see so much anger is because anger is one of the few places where we feel control. When I get angry, I'm the big brown guy with lots of facial hair. If I get loud, I mean, thank you, Uncle Sam. The Army taught me how to sing cadence, so I can be loud and big and scary and all that. And when I do that, I can control most situations pretty quickly, which is, I think, why we're drawn to it, because we feel so out of control in our lives. And it's one place we have it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I can't relate on, being big and loud, but I can, I can relate on, I would say things that I just knew would push buttons, or I knew that, they would take home with them because, so sorry. Anyways, I'm sorry. Things that I would just say that would make people hurt as much as I did. It really was that stereotypical phrase you hear all the time, hurt people. And once I was really able to honestly kind of work past my hurt, there's still things that I want to go back and reach out to people and apologize for. And I can't remember their last name, or, I can't remember even who it was that I said this thing to, but I was just in a bad place and I made mistakes, and I was working through things that I'd like to say that, well, there really is no excuse, to be honest with you. There's no excuse, but I was working through things and I didn't know how to deal with it correctly.
And I think so many of us are emotionally stunted for one reason or another. And when we struggle with that as we become adults, and very few adults that I'm seeing in culture today are doing the hard work of getting through that.
And I think that that's great that if they're genuinely working on it. I love that. I mean, ever since when I started seeing my therapist, my mom went to go see a therapist too. And then my sister went. My dad kind of has the same mindset as your dad, where it's like, well, we don't really need to talk to anybody. But again, my dad is 75 years old and, sometimes a little out of touch as much as I love him. Again, he's one of my biggest supporters, but, I think that it really just kind of opens up a world when you can show people your progress to be like, it's actually a really good thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and to talk about progress just a little bit, because you came from a kid who was from a hard place, who came to America and put in a much easier place, but still had a really hard time, and you had to walk through that, and you've moved through all of that. Now you're a mother with an intention on doing nothing but taking amazing care of your child, and you're also helping with kids in care as well. So can you talk about that just a little bit, where you're at and what you do, and how that really affects your life, or maybe how it lines up with your core values?
Absolutely. I was told my basically my whole life in therapy that one of the greatest things that I could do to help heal myself would be to give back. And I didn't really take that upon myself because I was so focused on, getting through school, having this surprise baby at age 20 and raising him and loving him. So finally this year I met Cheryl Williams, who you've had on the show before, and she runs fundfc.org, or Fundamentals for Foster Care, which is Texas based. And we really do whatever it takes to help donate and raise money for kids in the Texas system, because there are just never enough supplies. So we're currently collecting books. We're currently collecting clothes. Monetary donations are always appreciated, obviously, because then we can buy what it is that we need for these kids if we know their specific sizes or what books they are. It is a nonprofit organization. So, everything goes to these kids. And I really do think that does help heal. And having my son, I really do think is what changed my life. Having him, especially so young, I think it really saved my life. It was terrifying at first. I remember calling my parents. I couldn't even face them to tell them I was pregnant. And I was calling my parents. I had his dad right there. And at the time, his dad and I both worked for my dad. So my son's dad was just terrified. He was like, "Are you sure we have to tell them?" I was like, "Yeah, they're going to kind of notice." So when I called and I told them, I immediately hung up the phone. My sister calls me and she goes, "What's wrong? Mom is in fetal position on the floor." Everybody thought I was going to be a terrible mother. I'll just say it. Everybody thought I was going to be a terrible mother, because at the time I still wasn't really trying as hard as I could have been, because I still wasn't at the point where I really loved myself. I was in therapy, but I was just going because I felt like I had to, not because I really wanted to work at it. And my son, because of him, I talk to my therapist constantly about parenting things. I do everything I can to make sure that he grows up completely differently than how I did. So my son is making straight A's. He's always made straight A's. He made the principal's list. He's in soccer. He does Moko Jumbi. He's the sweetest kid in the whole world. Like so nice. He was such an easy baby. Potty trained himself at 18 months. He's a smart kid. He was everything. He really, we had a play potty or whatever, and we just kind of show him, this is how you do it. And he just wanted to learn. And so I think that I credit the way I raised my son and his success towards the resources that I was able to receive. And I'm just so thankful that, I was able to get that, but not every child does. And so anything that anybody can do to help out the kids who are still in the system, like I said, donations of any type were always appreciated. We would love that. We would love that, because some of these kids have nothing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we talk about the size of the foster system in the country right now. It's quite a challenge, but let's be honest. Y'all Texans have got something to talk about down there, about the state being the size of a country.
And then now with that, I don't mean to get political, but now with the whole no abortion thing past 6 weeks, there's going to be a lot more kids in the system. There's going to be a lot more. It is going to, I think it's probably going to double, triple, probably within the next 10 years, quite honestly. And that's, obviously a political thing, and we don't have to get into that. But I would just start prepping now with any kind of help that we can, because I really am scared to see, if this stays, how many kids we really will have in the next 10 years.
Yeah. That's that. Texas is a big state at any way you look at it. I lived there in West Texas for a hot minute when I was in the Army, and my gosh, that place is huge. You could drive all day and not get to the other side,
It's true.
Yeah, and the number of kids that are in that state, yeah, and just, I mean, again, I don't really dive off into politics typically because I think they're all kind of crazy. Every one of them, I don't care what letter they put after their name on CNN, they're all a little bit crazy up there. But the truth is that they're not all doing the best for Americans in general. Oftentimes they're taking care of themselves, and I get that, I see that, but I also know that a lot of times kids will end up being on the losing end because it's just collateral damage in their world. So that's really the struggles that I think we're facing in this country when we look at it, because the truth is these kids need to be paid attention to. We need to look out for this, because if we don't deal with this stuff now, especially with the younger kids in the system, if they're not dealt with today in their situations that they have, we're going to deal with them when they're older, because just look at the stats on kids who age out of the system and the number of them that end up in the justice system to be dealt with when they don't have any tools as a young kid.
1,000% agree with you on that. I think, you need to deal with it sooner rather than later. Otherwise, they'll be back. I mean, in some way or another. I mean, you're going to pay for it one way or another. And it is up to us, everybody, and any adult really. And I think it hits parents especially hard to take care and advocate for those children who can't really advocate for themselves yet. I mean, like I said, I didn't know when I first started therapy that I even needed it. And I was 8 years old. I had no idea that my adoption or what I had experienced in Russia was the reason I was acting the way I was. And had I not gotten help, I really do think I would be on drugs or be homeless, or maybe I would have even given up my own child. I had, and like, please don't get me wrong, like, it took years and years of therapy. It took a therapeutic boarding school. I'm still in therapy to this day. And it cost my parents hundreds of thousands of dollars, quite honestly. Because I was in boarding school for 4 years in Utah to just process all of this. But because they did that, I've never been arrested. I try to advocate for kids today. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but I'd love to say I'm a good mom. We can ask my son, but I don't know what he'll say. But, I just think that, you have to address it, because even though I was only in an orphanage from age 3 to 5, the damage and how long it took to fix that damage was astounding. It took almost my whole life to fix it. So these kids who are in foster care from birth to 18, and then they age out and then they're by themselves, I can't imagine surviving. I barely survived to 18 with my parents. It breaks my heart.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to realize just what the size of the impact one person can have in this system, because yes, and we have been told a number of times as parents of many, many kids over the years, look, you can't save them all. And I'm like, I know I can't save them all, but I'm going to tell you what I can do for one kid might make a difference for a lot of kids. I have one particular kid in my mind right now who was in our house for about 1.5 years when he was younger. And, with his diagnoses and where he ended up, quite frankly, it could have gone one of two ways. It could have gone really good or really bad. And with the way it went, we're fortunate that it went really well, because he learned he had an attachment disorder at a young age. And attachment disorders can quickly become what they call conduct disorders, which is the layperson has heard as psychopath, right? It can, and that's the sort of thing that can come out of real heavy trauma at a very young age, which he had experienced. And quite frankly, through no magic of our own, other than just to be a home where this little guy came and stayed with us for 1.5 years. And quite frankly, I think it was just super fortunate that he came at the time he did, that he and my wife formed this attachment that was ridiculous. Like, this boy was all about her.
Mama's boy. I love that. Every
picture I have of the two of them is like, wow, you can see it there. It's palpable that it's there. And it changed his life because he didn't go the other direction. He, last I saw, and we still keep up with them a little bit on Facebook, because they were young enough that when they were in our house, I can see why their parents don't want to, keep any connection with us open today. But I'll admit it, I do a little Facebook stalking once in a while, and I see the smiles. I don't see a kid who's in problems and trouble all over the place. I see a kid who knows how to smile now, and he did not when we met him. And that one change, that one kid, like he changed me in so many ways just to be able to see that turn happen. Then I go, yeah, this is not only was it worthwhile, this is a calling. Like the world's going to be different 100 years from today because of the effects that we've been able to have on kids. And quite frankly, as much as I talk about, how we try to help kids, the truth is these kids have affected my life so much. I'll never be able to give back as much as I have learned from some of these kids. They have taught me so much.
I love that. That is so heartwarming to hear. That is a wonderful thing to hear. And to kind of go back on what you said about, some people saying you can't save them all. I completely disagree with that mentality, because you're right. You're starting a butterfly effect. I really want to say it was Buddha or Gandhi. I can't remember. God, I should have looked up this quote before we talked, but it's 1 minute can change a day, 1 day can change a life, and 1 life can change the world. I mean, imagine if Elon Musk had been a foster kid, and look at how much he's done for science. That could be a child who is currently in the system who has that potential that we just haven't unlocked yet, because they don't have the support. That's it. They don't have the support.
Yeah. Understanding that is, if you just go Google, former foster kids and the word celebrities, and you'll find people like, Willie, if you happen to be listening, I'd love to talk with you. But Willie Nelson is one of those guys who I think is just a wildly interesting dude. But, his background, Marilyn Monroe was in foster care as a child. I mean, like people, if you just Googled it, you'll find the list of celebrities. It's huge. And I'm certain we could dive into the psychology of why those kids have become such amazing celebrities and people in this world. But yeah, it's all those lives were changed by someone somewhere along the line.
Absolutely. I actually did not know that about Marilyn or Willie. So that's great. You learn something new every day. I did not know that. I am going to Google that after this.
Yeah. And like I said, Willie, if you listen to this kind of stuff, man, I'd love to talk to you. Email me. Yeah. I don't expect to get an email at the end of this, but maybe I'll take it. But the thing is that he is who he is today because of the life he's lived and the choices that he made in that life and the choices that other people have made that thrust something on him that he had to deal with as a human being. And it's changed. Like the whole world will be different because these people have lived.
I agree. Especially, if they're successful enough to have their voice be heard by millions, then hopefully they use that platform for good. Yeah.
Who was it? Daryl McDaniels, I want to say was he from DMX? He and Sarah McLachlan are also both adoptees, and so I've heard Daryl tell his story before on a podcast here or there, and I'd love to be able to talk with Sarah about that as well, because she is such an influential individual in the world, and it's just amazing that when you look at this, this random kid comes into your house, who comes in and has this difficult story about where they come from, and you just try and help them through that. Often, most kids come to our house, we try and help them through what we can and try and help them start to feel safe enough to where they can begin to heal themselves a little bit and work through their situations. And then they go on, and we'll probably never know what difference that's made in 99% of their lives.
But that's still, it's still huge. I have this vague memory, and she didn't really take care of me or anything like that. But when my parents picked us up, we had this translator in Russia named Tatiana, and she was just so kind to me. And I think it must have been about 15 years after we were adopted, because I was around 20 years old. Some family friends went to Russia to go adopt, and my parents briefly mentioned Tatiana. Somehow they found her. They went there, they showed our pictures, and I will never forget her kindness. She had an apple tree. And again, she translated between me and my parents, so I could kind of understand what was going on, because I really didn't know what was going on. They told me my parents were coming to get me. I assumed my birth mother, and then these two Americans show up, and I'm like, what is happening? But yeah, I will just never forget the kindness, even though we spent maybe 3 or 4 days with her. That was it. And so I think what you guys are doing is something that they will definitely carry for the rest of their lives. Absolutely.
Yeah, it will make changes for sure. And I want to encourage anybody who wants to be a foster parent or anybody who is that, yeah, we're helping out a kid who may end up working a 40-hour week job and just being a great parent and a great husband or wife. And we might be helping out the next president of the country. You just never really know. All you can do is reach out and try to help a kid because they need it and no other reason.
To me, I even think a success story is as long as they're happy. It took me a long time to even figure out how to be happy. So when I woke up one morning and realized, it's okay and I'm safe and I'm loved, to me, like that was enough. Like that to me was success. And so I do think that if that's something people want to get involved in, they need to be aware of the risks and, that it could end up a little difficult. I mean, like I said, I gave my parents so much trouble that I literally had to be sent away for my high school years because I was such a bad influence on my younger sister. I mean, I was just out of control. And I don't think that that's what they were expecting, quite honestly. I don't think that they knew how to handle it, but they took every step that they could to make sure that they did handle it. And I wake up every day happy and blessed.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Anastasia, I want to thank you so much for telling your story on here today because people connect through stories. We've been telling stories for, all the way back to cave paintings, right? We've been telling stories, and that's how we communicate. And people can really understand who you are and how their life and yours intersect and what you can do with the world by that story. So I want to thank you for coming in, giving us some of your time, and allowing me, I guess, today to pick your brain a little bit and throw some of this out there in the world, and hopefully we'll create more good out of this than what's there originally.
I love that. And thank you for having me on. It's been such an honor. I really do appreciate this, and for you giving us a platform to speak our truths and to speak on behalf of the kids who are still in the system and who somebody could listen to from here and help potentially.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Anastasia's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have a Patreon account where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes or on your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
you are so super awesome. I think you guys so cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.